Big polluters and many corporations participate in climate negotiations for two main reasons. One is really clear. One's to influence them, because tackling climate change means changing our energy system. It means changing our economy, who our economy serves. Does it serve the rich? Does it serve the poor? And does it serve corporate profits? So they want to influence the negotiations to make sure we don't change the economy, to make sure we don't change the energy system, and to make sure they stay in charge. So the corporations manage to influence the climate talks in multiple ways. One of the ways is actually before we even get to the COP, they're in our national capitals lobbying, persuading politicians to support their positions, to make sure that when our governments get to the COP, they're already singing off the same hymn sheet as these lobbyists. During the talks themselves, you might see them on country delegations. That means they can take part in meetings, they can take part in negotiations, they can really get their point across. So that's one of the key things. And the second reason is to greenwash. So a lot of these corporations are involved in the climate talks in order to present themselves as climate champions and to hide their real activities, because often their real activities are trashing the climate, trashing communities, be it through fossil fuel extraction, monoculture agriculture, a lot of the extractive practices we see from big corporations. So it's a huge PR opportunity, particularly for those companies from the COP itself, that country. Sponsorship of the COP is obviously a great opportunity. And the reason they're allowed in there is because they're protected by countries. So for the past 10 years, we've had campaigns to try and kick them out, trying to kick big polluters out. But time and time again, despite governments representing 70% of the world's population pushing for a sort of conflict of interest policy and the need for a conflict of interest policy, the likes of the US, the EU, Canada, New Zealand, Australia have blocked it. Like every year, we've got big polluters sponsoring the COP, and COP27, some of the big ones that have already been announced are Coca-Cola, one of the world's biggest polluters in terms of plastic pollution. But it's very important from a climate perspective. Coca-Cola relies on virgin plastics. The oil and gas industry, their future, if they think, okay, if we move away from oil and gas for energy, how can they still make their money? It's through plastics. And so that's what's really important is the packaging industry, and Coca-Cola is a really key part of this, through the plastics pollution. So they're driving oil and gas demand, which means driving destruction of the climate, but also of local communities around those sites of extraction. We've got Egypt Air, an airline. If we're serious about tackling climate change, we need to massively reduce aviation. Some of the other companies involved, you have IBM and Microsoft, both of who provide technology to oil and gas industry sort of functions. They make sure the oil and gas industry can extract as much oil and gas as possible. And you've got Boston Consulting Group, who's been involved in multiple COPs, advising countries such as Saudi Arabia and others, who are sort of helping these countries greenwash their images. These big announcements from sponsors and others are going to be used to cover over the lack of progress in the talks. The fact that we're not giving money, the global north is not giving money to countries most impacted by climate change today already through what's called loss and damage, that we're not providing the billions that have been promised, that the technology is not being transferred, and instead they're looking at how can we use corporations in the global north to use this as a money-making exercise to sort of tackle climate change. Momentum is really building around the call to kick big polluters out of COP27. Hundreds of organizations are making the call. There's an open letter and a day of action, and we're really putting pressure on world leaders to take action. Climate action groups, the climate justice groups, we've had it from trade unions, from the youth groups, from the women and gender constituency. So these are sort of parts of the UNFCCC that represent thousands and thousands of organizations, and they're all calling for what's called an accountability framework. How can we not just have a conflict of interest policy, but we need a mechanism to make sure it's monitored and then enforced. But COP27 itself, it's a really good opportunity to be calling on the UNFCCC to make sure this remains a priority. It doesn't get swept under the carpet, as has happened in previous years. And also that what we can do at this COP is to demand that people attending the COP, those delegates lobbyists who come from sort of nice sounding foundations or think tanks and other things, we need to know who they represent. For now, it's really easy to get away with pretending, you're a good guy, whereas actually you might be representing big agriculture or a fossil fuel company. So there's something concrete can happen now. In terms of what people can do, there's a petition that can be signed. If you go to kickbigpollutersout.org, get your organization to sign on, you can sign on. And one of the key things is public pressure. So can we sort of make as big a noise as possible? Can we make sure that our leaders are hearing this? And how can we make it impossible for them to block this? And to realize that this doesn't stop at COP27. We need to make as loud a noise as possible at COP27, but the pressure has to keep on.